Thank you, Mr. President, Commissioner Schinas. One of the countries in which organized crime has been on a steep rise since the onset of the millennium is Sweden. 20 years ago, Sweden used to have the least amount of deadly shootings in Europe. Now, it's at the top. The only country not at war with more bombings than Sweden is Mexico. And I think Europe would do itself a favor by asking how this was allowed to happen. Now, for many years, Sweden was in a state of denial. The size of the migration had nothing to do with failed integration, they said. And I think to prevent and to fight organized crime, we must recognize the connection between mass migration and the steep rise in organized crime and violence. The fight against illegal migration must take priority over the universal right to apply for asylum, and illegal residents must be expelled. This won't solve anything, Commissioner. It won't solve everything. But it would give some breathing room in a situation where the criminal organizations have 30,000 members in Sweden, while the police officers are only 11,000. So my question to you, Commissioner, are you ready to commit yourself to anything of this? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before giving the floor to Commissioner Schinas, just to recall that the show of pictures is not allowed according with our rules. Commissioner, you've got the floor to respond.
Yes. Let me say, not only to Mr. Weimers, but also to this House, that radicalization does not happen in the carpeted halls of the European Parliament. It happens in our schools, it happens in our streets, in our prisons, and it happens online. So radicalization also is a threat that we need to be able to address effectively and intelligently. Our first line of defense is local practitioners. This is what the Radicalization Awareness Network that we have established has done. Training teachers, workers, community police officers, child protection workers, mental health care professionals. This is how you fight radicalization. I understand that there is a temptation in the minds of a certain school of thought to simplify and project all this as Europe's fault. But that begs the question, what Europe are we talking about? Because if Mr. Weimers has in mind criminals, radicalized terrorists, and tries to construct the argument that this is Brussels, then the counter-argument is that why did the terrorist who shot 2 Swedish citizens and killed them yesterday was not returned as it should have been for years under the rules that we have not yet been able to enact? Why? Because the Returns Directive is the only element of the Migration and Asylum Pact that you don't like, for which the European Parliament has not yet adopted a common position. So you cannot denounce Europe for failing to enact the rules that we proposed because the Returns Directive is not yet adopted. So I'm saying this to call again for some cool, sober analysis of a very complex situation. I can simplify too, but I will resist this temptation. Let's stick to the fact, let's change our rules, let's work together, and let's fight the radicals and the terrorists heads on without simplification.
Thank you. Colleague Weimers, I imagine you have a follow-up question?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm not simplifying anything here. I'm just stating the facts that failed migration policies to Sweden has led to a very urgent situation in which, as I said, there are 30,000 members of these gangs not Islamist gangs, but violent drug trafficking, weapons trafficking gangs. And they are killing each other, and people, innocent people, are suffering. And I'm asking you to focus on this in your future work. Thank you.
Commissioner, any comment?
Yes. We have proposed, as part of our proposal for a return directive, to have mandatory forced return for people with security backgrounds, like convictions, threat to public order and security. Do it quickly and do it without period of voluntary return notice. These rules have not yet been enacted. It is Europe that wants them to enact. It's Europe that pushes this legislation. So Europe cannot be responsible for the problem because we are responsible for the remedy. And I take again this opportunity to ask for this House, from all wings of this House, that we move quickly with a common position on the Returns Directive. We need the Returns Directive as part of our overall migration policy, and I would very much hope that in the light of these brutal terrorist attacks in Belgium yesterday and in France a few days ago, we do not lose more time on the need and the urgency to have them adopted. This would be the least we can do to complete the overall security puzzle around terrorism.